HOA Karen. Painted my pool pink for a gender reveal, so I filled it with ice. Part 1. The Pink Nightmare. I came back from a peaceful camping trip in the mountains, expecting to find my usual backyard oasis, my perfect little slice of peace. Instead, what I saw could have been ripped straight out of a fever dream. My private pool, my sanctuary, my chill zone, had been turned into an all-out flamingo explosion. It wasn't just a little splash of pink on the sides. No. It was a full-blown, aggressive, hot pink fantasy land, floating right in the middle. A half-soggy cardboard sign proudly glittering, "It's a girl! Love, the Johnsons!" Like it was the grand finale of a parade nobody asked for. Pink balloons bobbed in the water. Giant foam letters spelling baby lounged lazily on the surface. And, I kid you not, a pink smoke cannon was still hissing from one corner, puffing pastel clouds into the sky. The kicker? I didn't even know any Johnsons. And this wasn't a community pool. It was mine. Locked, fenced, posted clearly with private property signs at every angle. That's when it hit me. Only one person could have pulled something this insane off. Karen. 3 days earlier, right before I left for my trip, Karen, the walking embodiment of HOA tyranny, had cornered me. Fake smile, sugary tone, telling me the HOA was planning a little celebration. And wouldn't it be so nice if we all pitched in with our yards? I told her flat out. I'd be out of town. My property? Strictly off limits. She nodded. Too quickly. Too eagerly. And I caught it, that twitch in her left eye was the one that only shows up when she's plotting something truly diabolical. I should have known then. Now here I stood. Flip-flops half on, camping backpack dangling off one shoulder, staring at the pink horror show that had devoured my backyard. Neighbors peeked nervously from their patios, some trying and failing not to laugh. One of them even raised a glass at me, like he was toasting my misery. I stormed toward the backyard gate, fumbling with the lock, only to slip on a pile of confetti, glitter, everywhere. It rained down in sparkly little waves, mocking me. That's when she emerged. Karen, waltzing out of her garage, cup of coffee in hand, smugness radiating from her like solar flares. "Oh, you're back early," she chirped, drenched in fake surprise. "Didn't you get the flyer? We voted to use your pool for Emily's gender reveal. Isn't it adorable?" I nearly dropped my bag. "Voted," I sputtered. "Karen, this isn't a clubhouse. This is my house, my pool. You trespassed." She shrugged, as if I'd just told her the weather forecast. "Well, technically," she said, sipping her coffee, "the HOA considers shared community spirit a priority, and your pool is just so central. It felt right." I stared at her. There was a locked gate. There were signs. There were boundaries. "You thought, what? That this was community property?" She smiled wider, completely unbothered. "We thought you were being dramatic. Besides," she winked, "we had a permit." I blinked. "From who?" She beamed. "The HOA Activities Committee." "That's you," I said, stunned. "Exactly," she said brightly. I was shaking with rage when I called the police. The officer arrived, looked around at the dripping pink carnage, and politely told me it was a civil dispute. Karen handed him a laminated permit, like it was a constitutional document. I tried, desperately, to explain that real, actual paint had flooded my pool's filter system. Balloons were jammed into the pump, and pink dye was probably staining the tile forever. The officer just nodded, took a few notes, and said it was above his pay grade. I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that hideous, glittery "It's a Girl" banner waving over my destroyed backyard. I Googled everything: property rights, trespassing laws, emergency dye removal techniques, but one thing stood out: a post on an old forum. Petty HOA revenge must be answered, not with noise, but with poetic justice. And that's when the idea started to form. Karen expected me to be furious, expected me to scrub and mop and beg to have my peace back. She thought her little event would leave a pink mark, not just on my pool, but on my pride. But if she wanted drama, oh, she was about to get it. The coldest, iciest, most gloriously petty retaliation this neighborhood had ever seen. Part 2. The Ice Plan. The next morning, I stood in my kitchen, staring blankly into my coffee as the sun rose over the pink monstrosity still lurking in my backyard. Karen thought she won. She thought I'd just roll over, apologize for being inconvenienced, and quietly scrub away her glittery crime scene. But no. No way. If she wanted drama, she was about to get a full-blown winter blockbuster. While pretending to call a pool cleaning service, I actually rang up an industrial ice supplier, 2 towns over. The lady on the phone asked if I needed emergency refrigeration for meat or produce. I smiled, gripping my mug tighter. "No," I said, emotionally frozen expectations. She laughed and booked me 2 truckloads of crushed ice, scheduled to arrive by noon. Outside, Karen was already in her front yard, watering her roses, humming some insipid baby lullaby. She spotted me over the fence, waved cheerily with her coffee cup. "Getting the pool cleaned, I hope?" she called sweetly. I returned her smile, the fakest, frostiest smile I'd ever mustered. "Oh, it's getting handled," I said, voice as smooth and cold as the plan forming in my mind. She waved back, clueless, her yoga pants squeaking slightly as she turned away. That sound would haunt me until justice was served. By late afternoon, as the sun dipped low behind the trees, I stood on my porch, hands in my pockets, heart pounding with anticipation. 2 massive trucks backed down my driveway, behemoths rumbling with the promise of icy retribution. The first driver hopped out. "Where's the drop zone?" he asked, wiping his hands on his jeans. I pointed to my pool. "Dump it," I said simply. "Every last cube." He blinked, then grinned, the moment the first shovel full of ice hit the pool. A massive hiss of steam erupted into the air, like I'd summoned a glacier from the depths of a sci-fi movie. Karen came sprinting out of her garage, towel over one shoulder, probably thinking someone had finally caved and started cleaning up her party mess. She stopped mid-step, her mouth dropped open, cartoonishly wide, as she took in the growing mountain of ice. What are you doing?" she screeched. I leaned casually against the railing, smiling as the trucks kept pouring. "Winterizing," I said coolly. Didn't want the pink to spoil. Neighbors started gathering, peeking over fences, phones out, recording the madness. Karen tried to storm closer, but I had already taped up the perimeter with a giant homemade sign reading, "Private Property, Emergency Freeze Protocol." "You can't be serious," she screeched again, voice cracking with panic. "Oh, I'm deadly serious," I said, raising my coffee cup in salute. "And next time you touch my pool, bring skates." She opened her mouth, then shut it, completely speechless for the first time in recorded history. The only sound was the glorious, thundering rumble of more ice tumbling in. I went back inside, poured myself a cold drink, and stood by the window, watching as my pool transformed from a pink crime scene into a glacial monument to personal boundaries. It wasn't just a pool anymore, it was a message, loud, clear, and absolutely freezing. And Karen? She had finally received it. Part 3. The Glacier Awakens. The next morning, a soft mist floated across my backyard, a cold, ghostly blanket hovering above the surface of my newly frozen pool. It looked majestic. The entire pool was now packed to the brim with crushed ice, the last stubborn traces of pink dye peeking through the cracks. Like shame trapped beneath a sheet of pure, frozen justice. I stood there on the deck, coffee in hand, watching my breath cloud in the morning air. It felt satisfying, earned, righteously freezing. Karen, on the other hand, she was boiling. I spotted her storming out onto her porch, decked out in a blinding pastel pink velour tracksuit, coffee sloshing dangerously from her mug. She paused, squinting across the street at the glacier that used to be my pool. Slowly, almost comically, she crept closer, her sandals crunching on the frosted edge of the lawn. When she finally saw it up close, she let out a screech so loud it startled the crows from the trees. "What did you do to my... the pool?" I took a slow, satisfied sip of my coffee. "Looks beautiful, doesn't it?" I said, letting the steam drift dramatically from my cup. "The pink really pops against the ice?" Karen's face twisted into something between horror and pure, seething rage. "You're insane," she barked. "You've created a hazard. Someone could fall in." I nodded solemnly. "Exactly why I posted warning signs. Wouldn't want another trespassing accident. Right?" She glared at me, clutching her coffee like she wanted to launch it at my head, but then remembered, no doubt, the HOA's strict no public disturbances policy. Meanwhile, neighbors were gathering again, phones out, filming, whispers of "oh my God" and "you gotta be kidding me" floated through the chilly morning air. One of the neighborhood kids zipped by on a scooter, giggling. "Is it a skating rink now?" Karen nearly choked on her fury. With a furious spin, she stomped back toward her house, muttering threats about lawsuits, safety violations, and something about temperature regulations, whatever that meant. But I knew better. Karen wasn't done, not even close. Her brain was probably already spinning at 100 miles an hour, desperately plotting her next move. And me? I wasn't worried. Not even a little, because I had a plan too. A plan so solid, so cold, so spectacular, it would make what I'd just done look like a warm-up act. Part 4. Karen strikes back. By midday, the temperature had barely crept above freezing, and my backyard still looked like a scene from some low-budget Arctic documentary. I stood there admiring it, when a white van pulled up across the street. Out hopped 2 men, clipboard in hand, looking very official. Too official. I narrowed my eyes, and sure enough, Karen came waddling out of her house, waving them over dramatically like a castaway spotting rescue. "This way, gentlemen," she called, strutting toward my fence like she was leading a SWAT raid. I leaned casually against the porch post, sipping my second cup of coffee, watching the show unfold. The men, local code enforcement officers, inspected my pool from a safe distance, jotting notes, snapping pictures, occasionally exchanging looks that said, "What even is this?" Karen, meanwhile, launched into a full dramatic monologue. "This individual," she declared loudly, "has created an environmental hazard, a threat to public safety, and a violation of communal visual standards." The officers turned to me. One of them, a guy with a spectacular handlebar mustache, asked politely, "Sir, mind explaining what's going on here?" I smiled, the picture of calm. "Sure," I said. My private pool suffered property damage without consent, so I'm preserving the scene for legal purposes while awaiting professional remediation. Technically true. And completely infuriating for Karen. "He's lying!" she shrieked, jabbing a trembling finger at the frozen pool. "This monstrosity is damaging community morale." Handlebar mustache scribbled something down. "Probably community morale." The other officer shrugged. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "this appears to be private property. No evident public access, no city code violation. Nothing we can cite." Karen's mouth opened, then closed, then opened again, like a fish gasping for air. But what about unauthorized glacier construction?" she wailed. Even the officers couldn't hide their smiles. One of them tipped his cap toward me and said, "Have a good day, sir." "Stay warm." Karen stood frozen, pun absolutely intended, as the van drove away. And me? I gave her a little wave, nice and slow, before turning back inside. But deep down, I knew Karen wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. If anything, this latest failure would only make her more desperate, more reckless. And when Karen got desperate, things got messy. I needed to be ready, because the real ice war was just getting started. Part 5. Cold War escalates. By the next morning, the ice was still holding strong, a glittering frozen monument to personal boundaries. And Karen? Oh, she was seething. I could feel her eyes boring holes through my fence. Even when I wasn't looking. Even the squirrels seemed nervous, like they could sense a Category 5 Karen brewing nearby. Around midday, there was another knock at my door. This time, it wasn't code enforcement. It was a man, wearing a rumpled gray suit, holding a battered briefcase that looked like it had fought and lost several battles. He cleared his throat awkwardly. "Mr. Thompson?" he asked. "I'm Gerald Whitman, legal representative for Ms. Karen Wilcox." I raised an eyebrow and tried not to laugh. He handed me a stack of papers, printed, stapled, and slightly crooked, and said, "You're being served." I flipped through the papers, barely holding back a grin. Karen was suing me for reckless endangerment, mental distress, and hostile environmental manipulation. Hostile environmental manipulation. I had to bite my tongue to keep from bursting out laughing right there on the porch. "You're serious?" I asked. Gerald just shrugged, clearly a man who regretted every life choice that had led him to this moment. "You're welcome to contest it," he mumbled, then turned and practically sprinted back to his car. I watched him drive off, then sauntered back inside, papers flapping comically in the breeze. I poured myself a fresh cup of coffee, propped my feet up, and started reading the so-called lawsuit. It was incredible. Karen had actually included printed photos of my frozen pool, of me sipping cocoa by the ice, and even a close-up of the private property and emergency freeze protocol sign. There were even dramatic captions like "Visual assault on community spirit," "Dangerous accumulation of sub-zero hostility." It read less like a legal document and more like the script for a bad soap opera. By sunset, word had spread. Neighbors texted me screenshots of the flyers Karen was handing out. Little pink sheets claiming that my ice stunt had fractured neighborhood harmony and endangered aquatic ecosystems. One flyer even included a crudely drawn cartoon of me cackling atop an iceberg, with tiny crying flamingos floating around. Honestly, it was kind of flattering. By the time night fell, Karen had escalated to full propaganda mode, marching up and down the sidewalk, handing out flyers, ranting about community values and icy terrorism. Meanwhile, Neighbors? They weren't buying it. In fact, they were loving it. I caught old man Tucker sipping a beer on his porch, watching Karen storm by, and shouting, "Hey, when's the ice skating party, neighbor?" Karen turned purple. I nearly choked on my drink. That night, as I stood by the window, watching Karen's one-woman parade of rage disappear into the darkness, I realized something. She didn't just want to beat me. She wanted to erase the reminder that she had lost. And I wasn't just fighting back anymore. I was winning. One glorious frosty day at a time. Part 6. Ice. Cameras. Action. It started with a rumble. Not from Karen's endless stomping around the neighborhood, but from an unexpected arrival, right at the end of my driveway. A local news van. Logo splashed across the side. Satellite dish perched on top like a crown. I blinked, then laughed out loud. Apparently, someone, wonder who, had sent footage of the pink pool disaster and emergency ice drop to the station's neighborhood drama segment. And the station? Oh, they loved it. Within minutes, a cheerful reporter hopped out, microphone in hand, flashing a bright smile that said, "We're here to turn your HOA nightmare into primetime gold." Karen, of course, came charging out of her house like a deranged parade marshal, waving a flyer and shouting about community sabotage. The reporter didn't even flinch. She turned, looked Karen square in the eye, and said, "Ma'am, please step to the side. We're here to interview the property owner." Karen's jaw dropped so hard I swear I heard it hit the pavement. I strolled over casually, pretending not to notice her sputtering behind me. The camera started rolling. The reporter smiled wide and asked, "So, tell us, what exactly happened here?" I grinned. "Well," I said slowly, "I went camping for a few days, came home, and found my private pool transformed into a flamingo-themed crime scene." A pause, just long enough for the camera to zoom in on the frozen pink wasteland behind me. "So," I continued, "rather than get mad, I decided to get even, in the coldest, most satisfying way possible." The reporter laughed. The cameraman chuckled. Karen? She looked like she might physically implode. She tried, twice, to rush into frame, babbling about unauthorized glacial expansion and neighborhood morale. Both times. The crew gently but firmly edged her out of the shot. By the end of the interview, I had become a minor local celebrity. The station even teased the segment for that night's broadcast. From pool party to polar vortex, a homeowner's cold-blooded revenge. I couldn't wait. As the sun set, the neighbors gathered in their driveways, laughing, swapping popcorn, pulling up lawn chairs, waiting for Karen's meltdown to air on TV. When the piece finally rolled, it was glorious. Footage of the pink-drenched pool. Slow-motion shots of the ice trucks dumping load after sparkling load into the water. Dramatic interviews. Karen screaming in the background. Caption simply, "Very spirited resident." I saved it immediately, several times. By the next morning, my phone was blowing up. Memes, GIFs, even a short remix video set to Ice Ice Baby, featuring Karen's furious face, spliced perfectly to the beat. Someone made a TikTok. It went viral. The comments were brutal and absolutely glorious. Karen tried it, but got frozen out. This is the petty excellence I aspire to. Justice. Served on ice. And through it all, Karen? She stayed inside. Curtains drawn, silent. For now. But I knew better. Karen didn't retreat because she'd learned her lesson. Number Karen was regrouping, and when she came back, it wouldn't be with a flyer or a fake lawsuit. It would be something bigger, something desperate, and I would be ready. because this wasn't just a neighborhood squabble anymore. This was war. Part 7. Karen's Counterattack. The neighborhood had barely stopped laughing over the news segment when Karen struck back. And boy, did she strike hard. Early the next morning, way before the sun even considered rising, the peaceful air of our sleepy cul-de-sac was shattered by the blaring, tortured screams of seagulls. Mixed with Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, it was like being trapped inside the world's worst horror movie, directed by a tone-deaf maniac. I stumbled onto my porch, coffee half made, still wearing mismatched socks. Across the street, I saw it. Karen's front yard was now armed to the teeth with a sound system straight out of a rock concert. Massive speakers pointed directly at my house, motion sensors rigged to trigger every time a squirrel, leaf, or unfortunate breeze dared to cross her driveway. And every time they did, another blast of shrieking gulls and dramatic symphony music filled the air. It wasn't quite loud enough to break any noise ordinances. Karen knew better than that, but it was just loud enough to rattle my windows and wake every dog in a 3-block radius into a barking frenzy. I stared at the chaos, blinking, processing, and then I laughed. Because of course Karen wouldn't fight fair. She wasn't built for it. She didn't want justice. She wanted revenge, served with a side of absolute cartoonish insanity. To make matters worse, Karen had also planted a brand new sign in her yard. Pest deterrent in use. Property protected by audio-based surveillance. I nearly choked on my coffee. Meanwhile, the neighbors were already texting. Dude, is she trying to summon demons? Is this a HOA-approved concert? I'm filing emotional distress against seagulls. It was beautiful. In a tragic, migraine-inducing sort of way. I called the HOA board, just to see if they'd do anything. Predictably, Karen had already filed her own complaint, claiming that my unnatural frozen pond was leaching toxic chemicals into the communal air. She even attached a screenshot of a random WebMD page about freezer burn as scientific evidence. I couldn't make this up if I tried. The board, bless them, politely agreed to investigate both concerns. Translation: they were going to ignore us both and hope we eventually fought to the death. But Karen wasn't just trying to annoy me, she was trying to break me, to create enough chaos, enough drama, that the HOA would finally step in and force me to thaw the menace she'd created in her own imagination. It was a bold plan. Stupid, but bold. Unfortunately for Herbie, I didn't rattle easy, because while she was busy cranking up the volume, I was busy preparing my next move. If Karen wanted a public spectacle, she was about to get one. Bigger, louder, and colder than anything she could possibly imagine. The real battle was about to begin. Part 8. Operation Polar Party. I knew if I kept playing defense, Karen would keep throwing tantrums until the HOA cracked under the noise. So, it was time to flip the script. If Karen wanted chaos, I was going to give her the coldest, loudest, most legendary neighborhood spectacle she had ever seen. I called in a few favors, texted a few friends, made a few unconventional purchases online, and 2 days later, Operation Polar Party was officially underway. First step, build the world's most ridiculous winter wonderland, right in my backyard. Inflatable igloos? Check. Cardboard polar bears? Absolutely. A 10-foot-tall inflatable penguin wearing sunglasses and holding a frozen margarita? Essential. We even built a DIY ice slide out of plastic sheeting and dish soap, stretching from the edge of my deck right into the middle of the frozen pool. Completely safe. totally within zoning regulations, and absolutely guaranteed to make Karen's eye twitch for a week straight. By Saturday afternoon, the Arctic zone was in full swing. Kids zoomed down the mini-slide, laughing so hard they fell over themselves. Neighbors set up folding chairs around the pool, sipping hot cocoa and cheering each other on. Someone even brought a snow machine, blasting fake flurries into the air every 15 minutes. It was pure, frosty, glorious anarchy. And Karen? Oh, she was losing her mind. She stormed onto her porch, still wearing that hideous pastel velour tracksuit, and screamed across the lawn, "This is an unsanctioned public event. You need a permit." I waved cheerfully from my inflatable penguin throne. "Private party, Karen!" I shouted back. "Invitation only!" The kids booed her. Someone tossed a marshmallow at her feet. Karen turned on her heel, stomping back inside like a villain denied entry to their own evil lair. But I wasn't done yet. Later that night, when the fake snow glistened under the porch lights, and the laughter echoed across the entire block, I unleashed the pièce de résistance, a rented karaoke machine, set up front and center, right beside the pool. And the first song, of course, Ice, Ice Baby. The moment the beat dropped, neighbors went wild. Jake, my buddy from 2 doors down, grabbed the mic and absolutely butchered the lyrics. Kids danced on the lawn. Even Mr. Patel, who usually complained about noise past 8 p.m., was clapping along in a snowman sweater. And Karen? She flung open her window, shrieking, "You're violating the peace covenant! You're destroying the neighborhood's aesthetic unity!" Someone, I think it was Mrs. Tucker, shouted back, "Lighten up, Karen! It's just a little ice." The whole block roared with laughter. Karen slammed her window so hard, it rattled her own holiday wreath. I leaned back on my inflatable throne, hot cocoa in hand, watching the icy glow of the fake snow swirl through the night. And for the first time since this ridiculous war began, I felt it. Victory. It wasn't loud, it wasn't flashy. It was cold, quiet, and absolutely undeniable. Karen had tried to drown the neighborhood in glitter and tantrums, and instead, she'd united them. Against her. One snowball fight, one karaoke massacre, one penguin float at a time, and, as the night wore on, and the stars shimmered above the frozen battlefield, I knew one thing for sure. The ice war wasn't just a battle anymore. It was history in the making. Part 9. Karen's Last Stand. For a few glorious days, peace returned to the cul-de-sac. The kids kept sliding down the Arctic zone. The neighbors kept gathering around the frozen pool, and the inflatable penguin, sunglasses slightly askew, presided over it all like a benevolent icy king. But Karen? Karen wasn't the type to surrender quietly. I knew, deep in my gut, that her silence wasn't a sign of defeat. It was the calm before the storm. And sure enough, 3 days later, she made her move. I woke up to a knock at the door, a sharp, aggressive knock, the kind that said, "This is not a friendly visit." When I opened it, there she was, Karen, flanked by 2 very uncomfortable-looking HOA board members, now clutching clipboards like they were life preservers. Karen herself was dressed for battle. Pink power suit, matching pink folder, and a glare so intense it could have melted my pool faster than the spring sun ever could. "We are here," she announced grandly, "to conduct an emergency community compliance review." I blinked. Of what? Karen thrust a paper toward me, a motion she had clearly practiced, and said, "Of your unauthorized transformation of a community visual feature." I squinted at the document. It was insane. Karen was trying to classify my private pool, as a shared emotional asset. Meaning, she argued, it was no longer just my pool, it belonged to the spirit of the community. And by freezing it, I had committed aesthetic sabotage. I had to cover my mouth to hide the laugh bubbling up. "You're saying my backyard is public property now?" I asked, voice carefully neutral. Karen beamed. "Exactly. Therefore, the HOA reserves the right to demand restorative action. Translation: unfreeze the pool, repaint it pink, host a public apology brunch." I looked at the two board members. One of them, poor Mr. Gibbons, looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. The other one just stared at the ground, shifting from foot to foot. Karen mistook their discomfort for agreement. "We have the signatures," she said, tapping her folder triumphantly. "The motion is going to pass." I leaned against the doorframe, pretending to think it over. Then I smiled. Slow. Icy. "You know," I said softly, "I was actually hoping you'd try this." Karen blinked. "Because," I continued, "I happen to have some documents too." I disappeared inside for a moment, returning with my own folder, thick, heavy, and packed to the brim. I handed it to Mr. Gibbons first. Inside, photographs, surveys, copies of property deeds, proof that Karen's beloved shared emotional asset argument was complete fiction. Oh, and a certified letter from the city inspector confirming that Karen's illegal shed extension, hidden behind her rose bushes, had been encroaching on HOA green space for years. And worse, the fine, daily, compounding. Karen's face went from victorious pink to panicked white in about 3 seconds flat. "You," she gasped. "You can't." Mr. Gibbons cleared his throat. "Actually, Karen, he can. And we'll be issuing you a formal notice about your structure violation." The other board member mumbled something about reassessing leadership guidelines before speed-walking back to his car. Karen just stood there, trembling, folder slipping from her fingers, her grand plan, her dramatic final stand, frozen solid. She turned without another word and stumbled back toward her house. No flyers, no screaming, no bullhorn, just silence, the sweetest, coldest silence I had ever heard. I leaned back against the doorframe, smiling as I watched her retreat. Because finally, after months of glitter, pink dye, sound attacks, and shameless propaganda, Karen's reign of terror was melting away. One glorious frozen step at a time. Part 10. The Great Thaw. For the first time in what felt like forever, the cul-de-sac was quiet. No protest marches, no shrieking seagull symphonies, no pink flyers fluttering like angry confetti. Just peace, soft and still, like the world itself had finally exhaled. I stepped out onto my porch, mug of coffee warming my hands, and looked out over the backyard. The Arctic zone was starting to melt. The thick sheets of ice that had turned my pool into a fortress were slowly breaking apart, cracking, shifting, shimmering under the gentle touch of spring sunshine. Chunks of frozen pink floated lazily across the surface like tiny, defeated rafts drifting in a sea of calm. It was beautiful. A slow, natural undoing of all the chaos Karen had unleashed. Nature, doing what no HOA rulebook ever could. As the days warmed, the neighbors kept stopping by. Some just waved and grinned. Others lingered, sipping lemonade, swapping stories about the great ice war of 2025. Jake even joked about making it an annual event. Next year, bigger slide, maybe a frozen hot tub. Karen, meanwhile, had gone eerily quiet. Her pink golf cart, once a daily nuisance parading up and down the block, sat abandoned under a tarp. Her yard, once obsessively maintained, grew wild around the edges. Rose bushes wilting, the pastel flags she'd strung up now tattered and sun-bleached. She wasn't gone. Not yet. But it was clear. Karen had lost her crown. And honestly, it felt a little bittersweet. Not because I missed the drama. God number, but because, in a weird, twisted way, Karen had accidentally given the neighborhood something it hadn't had in years. Unity. Before her glitter invasion, we were just a collection of polite nods and forced small talk. Now, we were a community, a real one. Kids played hopscotch across 3 driveways without fear of clipboard citations. Mrs. Patel hosted spontaneous potlucks. Jake organized late-night marshmallow roasts around his new fire pit. People laughed more, worried less. And all around us, the ice melted, drop by drop, washing away the last stubborn traces of Karen's madness. One lazy Saturday afternoon, I sat by the pool, feet dangling over the edge, watching the final shards of pink drift and disappear. The water was clear again, still and peaceful, just like it had been, before the flyers, before the glitter, before the war. Someone handed me a cold lemonade. I looked up. It was Emily, Karen's daughter, baby in one arm, tiny, bashful smile on her face. "Thank you," she said quietly. I nodded, because some things didn't need words. Some victories weren't shouted from rooftops or splashed across HOA newsletters. They were felt. In the quiet clink of ice cubes in a glass, in the easy laughter of neighbors sharing a sunset, in the slow, steady thaw of a neighborhood, healing itself. I leaned back, letting the warmth of the evening sun soak into my skin. And for the first time since this insane battle began, I didn't feel angry, or exhausted, or even triumphant. I just felt free. Part 11. Legends are forged in ice. The weeks after the Great Thaw were nothing short of magical. It was like the whole neighborhood had been holding its breath for years. And finally, someone had hit the release valve. Sunday barbecues popped up without warning. Kids raced scooters down the sidewalks, no one yelling about unauthorized wheel-based activities. Even the HOA newsletter, which used to read like a list of commandments, now sounded almost cheerful. The bulletin board at the park? Gone were the stern memos about hedge trimming and mailbox colors. Instead, pictures from the polar party were proudly pinned up, snapshots of laughing kids, marshmallow sticky smiles, even one glorious photo of Karen, mid-fall into the snow cone machine, preserved forever like a Renaissance painting. Someone, I never found out who, hung a hand-painted sign over the bulletin board that simply said, "In ice, we trust." It stayed up for weeks. Neighbors who had barely nodded at each other before were now swapping homemade lemonade recipes, offering each other lawn equipment, even planning weekend camping trips together. It wasn't just a thaw of ice. It was a thaw of fear, of suspicion, of that silent, heavy tension that had made our little cul-de-sac feel like a minefield for too long. And somehow, we all knew. We had Karen to thank for it. Not that anyone ever said it out loud, but sometimes, late at night, someone would raise a toast at a barbecue and just say, "To freedom," and we'd all nod, grinning, because we knew exactly what it meant. Meanwhile, Karen, she became something of a legend herself, the stuff of whispered stories, half-joking, half-shuddering tales traded over backyard fences. Remember when Karen tried to sue over emotional frostbite? Remember the Penguin Army? Remember when she tried to turn the HOA meeting into a courtroom drama? And of course, the immortal story. The time she declared the pool a shared emotional asset. Jake even started a running joke. Whenever something ridiculous happened, he'd mutter. Karen would have filed a noise complaint about that breeze. It became a badge of honor, a symbol of everything we'd survived, and everything we refused to ever go back to. And me? I stayed right where I was. No lawsuits, no protests, no flyers, just lazy afternoons by the clear blue pool, friends drifting in and out, kids splashing and laughing, the faint smell of barbecue smoke curling into the sky. Sometimes, when the breeze was just right, I'd catch the scent of old glitter, maybe from a forgotten piece stuck deep in a fence post, and I'd smile, because legends aren't just forged in battles, they're forged in the stubbornness to stand your ground, in the laughter that follows the storm, in the quiet pride of knowing. You didn't just survive, you changed everything. And somewhere out there, maybe, Karen was sitting in some new neighborhood, plotting her next glitter bomb disaster. But around here, we didn't worry anymore, because we knew no matter what tried to creep in, flyers, pink paint, or pastel tyranny, we had something stronger now. Community, friendship, and just enough lingering stubbornness to freeze out anything and anyone that dared to mess with it again. Part 12. Epilogue. Long live the chill. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, I sit by the edge of my pool, feet dangling in the cool water and just listen. No shouting, no clipboards, no pastel armies marching across my lawn, just the sound of kids laughing down the block, the soft splash of a cannonball landing 2 houses over, the lazy buzz of cicadas in the summer air. And I smile, because this is what we fought for. It wasn't just about a pool or balloons or glitter explosions. It was about something bigger, something that Karen, in all her pink glittered madness, never understood. It was about protecting our space, our right to enjoy a lazy Sunday afternoon without fear of compliance violations, our right to laugh, to celebrate, to live, without needing anyone's laminated permission slip. In the end, Karen moved out. Rumor has it she found a more organized community 2 towns over, one with stricter noise regulations and mandatory HOA dress codes. Good for them. God help them. Around here, we moved on. The polar party became an annual event. The penguin floats came back every winter, bigger, sillier, more outrageous than before. Jake even found a blow-up narwhal one year and declared it the official guardian of the chill. Kids who had once whispered, "Yes, ma'am," when Karen walked by, now ruled the sidewalks with scooters and sidewalk chalk masterpieces. No one flinched when the barbecue smoke drifted over the fences. No one tensed up when someone parked half an inch over the line. We were free, really free. Because once you've tasted that kind of freedom, once you've stared down the pink tide and lived to tell the tale, you don't ever let it slip away again. Sometimes, neighbors still joke about the ice war. Someone will raise a glass, tilt their head toward the clear blue pool, and say with a wink, "Long live the chill," and we'll laugh, because we know. It's not just a joke, it's a promise. That no matter how many Karens the world throws at us, no matter how many flyers or clipboards or petty power plays, this community, this cul-de-sac, this scrappy, stubborn, glorious patch of backyard America will always stand together, loud, proud, and if necessary, armed with inflatable penguins, a karaoke machine blasting Ice Ice Baby, and a backyard full of snow cones. Because some battles are fought with noise, some are fought with paperwork. But the best ones, the ones you remember forever, they're fought with laughter, with loyalty, with a little bit of ice, and a whole lot of heart. And so, as the sun sets behind my pool, turning the water gold and pink and every shade in between, I raise my glass one last time to neighbors, to freedom, and to the everlasting undefeated spirit of the chill.